Hey everybody, Dr. Chris here. Thanks for joining me as usual. So, I always say that nutrition is the most potent way to lose weight, barring surgery and medications. And nutrition is an incredibly complicated, but at the same time, really simple thing to address, okay? Now, getting it done in the real world is a different situation. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today a little bit. And one diet plan in particular is called the 80-20 plan, okay? So one issue with diets is people don't like them, right? You want to eat whatever you want to eat, whenever you want to eat, all right? And you look at the ketogenic diet, every single year around January, they have a list of the worst diets ever for the prior year. Ketogenic diet's always right towards the top of the list, and one of the main reasons cited is because it's really hard to stick with, okay? Now, does making something difficult to stick with bad? Okay, I don't know, are you not trying hard enough to stick with it? Are you too lazy? Who knows, but it's definitely an issue for a lot of people. And so along comes this 80-20 plan. We'll talk about the details in just a minute here. One thing I do want to point out, you may have heard me say this before with diet plans in general, okay? Go back to this study from a couple of years ago where they said, okay, you eat a low carb diet, you eat a low fat diet, you eat a high carb diet. And they followed people for however long they followed people, and maybe surprised, maybe not surprised. Some people lost a bunch of weight, some people gained weight, and so they're all over the place as far as how individuals responded to these different nutrition plans. But then you look at the data a little bit different way, which the study researcher did, and he said, okay, if I told you to do a high carb diet and you actually stuck with it, how did you do? And if you were supposed to be on a low fat diet and you stuck with it, what did you do? And the people who stuck to the plan most closely did the best. They all lost weight. Okay, almost all of them, statistically significant amount of people lost weight. Okay, what tended to happen in these studies where you're told to do something, you can drift to whatever you want, but yet you're still considered in that same initial study group. And so the people who drifted tended to drift towards a standard, typical American diet, and surprise, those people didn't lose weight. Okay, so my point is that maybe it is sticking to a halfway decent, reasonable diet that's more important than the particular thing, than the particular diet plan. So, people who are keto don't like me saying that, hey, guess what? You can lose weight on a high carb diet. What? Yeah, yes, you can, okay? People who are saying, yeah, I chug MCT oil and I eat bacon every day for breakfast, fat's not a problem. Guess what? You can lose weight on a low fat diet. It works, okay? So there's all sorts of different approaches. Some of it's genetic, how your body handles the different nutrients. Some of it is related to everything else outside of nutrition, right? Sleep and rest and all that stuff. All right, so here comes the 80-20 plan. All right, so the 80-20 plan comes along and says, hey, people don't like being overly restricted. They tend to burn out and then binge or gorge or completely fall off the wagon if they over restrict. So let's do this. Let's say, hey, be reasonable for 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time, do whatever you want, okay? Now, all sorts of caveats for this. Lots of people love it. Lots of people do terribly with it, okay? So like a lot of things, when you say, hey, be reasonable for 80% of the time, reasonable means very different things to different people, right? What's reasonable for me, in my mind, you might think, whoa, that's overly restrictive. Someone who's, going from eating chocolate every day to eating potato chips thinks they're being more reasonable. Nutritionally, maybe it's not so much of an improvement, right? So we gotta be careful how we define reasonable, or when we tell people, hey, be reasonable, because we don't know what that means to that individual, okay? Nice thing about this is it makes people more likely to stick to a plan, okay? If you know, oh, I can relax a little bit, I just have to be careful for 80% of the time, I have that other 20% to do okay, all right? People tend to stick with it if they're eating healthy, I'll say lean meats, fiber, vegetables for most of the time, and then they're a little loose the other percent of the time. Hey, that's better than never eating anything healthy, right? Okay, so that's one thing, is that helps people stick to it. Other thing is careful when you use the word reasonable in any situation, but especially this. Okay, things to be careful with this approach. One is, you heard me say a second ago, most of the time, eat healthy most of the time. That's not what the 80-20 diet is, okay? The 80-20 plan is 80% of the time, you're being healthy, okay? So what you can see people do is you say, hey, most of the time I'm being healthy. And when you actually add up the numbers or the amount of time they spend eating something healthy versus not healthy, it's actually the majority of the time they're healthy. So that's, 51% they're healthy, 49% of the time you're not healthy, okay? That's not gonna cut it, all right? And so you really have to be significant part of your time and intake being healthy, and then a small part of it being less restrictive. I don't want to say unhealthy, but less restrictive. Okay? And the other thing is along the lines of, what percentages we're talking about here. If you're real particular about it, let's just do the numbers here. Say 2,000 calorie diet, 20% of your calories, that's 400 calories. Okay? So if you're going to be using 400 calories of less healthy things, what if it's straight sugar? Okay? It's probably not the best way to spend those 400 calories, okay? Something like, having some oatmeal where you're gonna get a little bit of carbohydrates, fiber, whole grains, that's okay, but not perfect, right? So you gotta be careful where you spend those 20% of your less than healthy, overly restricted calories, okay? Now, the idea is that you don't have to think about it that hard. So when I talk about measuring, 400 calories is 20% of a 2,000 calorie diet. With this approach, it's one thing we're trying to avoid is being too particular about it so you don't have to measure things. Maybe right up front for a week or 2 or 3 or 4, just so you get some idea of it, and then it's intuitive after that, how much is 80%, how much is 20%. But something else that's very important with this is lowering stress levels related to eating, okay? For anyone I work with, I don't want you over-stressing about food, okay? And that's what everyone does when they're trying to lose weight. They think about, what am I gonna eat next? What can't I eat? What can I eat? How much does this weigh? How many grams of this or that? And that's a stress, okay? And you're fighting against yourself, and that's a stress that I don't want anyone having. Now, I do want people to pay attention, more for educational purposes, track stuff, measure everything for a month, and then do it intuitively once you have it figured out. But that month is more, for education and learning and self-reflection, not part of the plan, okay? And so that's an important part of the 80-20 plan is you can chill out a little bit, relax, 80-20, just kind of be reasonable most of the time, or 80% of the time, and then you can relax. You don't have to stress as much about eating, but you do have to be closer to 80-20 than you do to 51-49, okay? And the last point on the 80-20 plan is some of it has to do with what you're doing beforehand, okay? So someone who's doing 90% healthy and 10% less healthy, but they're sticking with it, clearly they're probably gonna do a lot worse if they switch to an 80-20 plan, with the exception of if they lower their stress levels going to 80-20. All right, now someone who's doing that 51-49, math is hard, 49-51%, good, bad, healthy, less healthy, and they go to 80-20, well, yeah, they're gonna see some progress, okay? Because it's a significant change from what they were doing. All right, so quick talk on the 80-20 plan, just to review some of the highlights. The idea is that it's less restrictive, you can mellow out a little bit and not worry so much about food, but you gotta pay enough attention to know that it's close to 80-20 and not just 50-50. All right, and then the third thing is don't think of it as healthy, unhealthy, restricted, binging. Think of it as being very healthy and then maybe a little more relaxed, a little less healthy for the remaining time. All right, so Dr. Chris, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Be sure to schedule your free 30-minute initial phone consultation by sending me an email or by visiting our website at refinedwellnessconsulting.com.